Species concept. In biology, a species is the basic unit of classification and a taxonomic rank of an organism, as well as a unit of diversity. A species is a basic unit of classification and a taxonomic rank of an organism, as well as a unit of biodiversity. The species problem is the set of questions that arise when biologists attempt to define what a species is. Such a definition is called species concept. There are at least 26 recognized species concepts. A species concept that works well for sexually reproducing organisms may be useless for species that reproduce asexually. The scientific study of the species problem has been called microtaxonomy. One common question is how to decide which species an organism belongs to, because reproductively isolated groups may not be readily recognized. There is a continuum for reproductive isolation due to inbreeding, no inbreeding, to panmixis and limited interbreeding. Populations can move toward or backward along this continuum at any point, meeting the criteria for one or another species concept and failing others. While the concept of species may not be perfect model of life, it is still an incredibly useful tool to scientists and conservators for studying life on Earth. If species are mixed and clearly distinct from one another, there would be no problem. But the evolutionary process caused species to change continuously and to grade into one another. Species were seen from the time of Aristotle until the 18th century as fixed categories that could be arranged in a hierarchy. In the 19th century, biologists grasped that species could evolve given sufficient time. Charles Darwin in 1859 book on the origin of species explained how species could arise by natural selection. That understanding was greatly extended in the 20th century through genetics and population ecology. Genetic variability arises from mutations and recombination, while organisms themselves are mobile, leading to geographical isolation and genetic drift. So genes can sometimes be exchanged between species by horizontal gene transfer. One species can arise rapidly through hybridization and polyploidy, and species may become extinct for a variety of reasons. Viruses are a special case driven by the balance of mutation and selection and can be treated as quasi-species. Species definitions. Various definitions have been put forward by different workers. Cuvier in 1829. Assemblage descended from common parents and resemble each other. Darwin did not give a clear definition of species and offered an explanation as to how species evolve as a gradual process. And Thomson group of individuals distinguished by an irreducible set of constant properties and connected by descent and genetic relationship. Then Dobzhansky in 1937, that stage for evolutionary process at which the once potentially interbreeding array of forms becomes segregated to two or more separate arrays which are physiologically incapable of interbreeding. Huxley in 1924, a geographical definable group whose members can potentially interbreed in nature and which normally in nature does not interbreed freely or with full fertility with related groups and is distinguished from them by constant morphological differences. Then Zimmermann in 1948, groups of organisms which are so similar that on superficial observation they are considered to be on the same kind. Then Mayer in 1957, species of groups of interbreeding natural populations that are reproductively isolated from other such groups. Then Bogmeyer in 1963, species are natural phenomenon and biological unit based on objective facts. Wilmoth in 1967, a well-defined autonomous and persistent organic unit living in a free state of nature, not grading freely into any other unit and generally of less perfect fecundity outside than inside its limits. It differs from all other species not only morphologically but also in its physiological manifestation and in psychic behavior. So a symmetry of 26 species concepts, 22 distinct species concepts. Have been many different additional concepts since Aiden's review. Agamospecies, synonyms: microspecies, paraspecies, pseudospecies, semispecies, quasi-species, ganomospecies. For prokaryotes, asexual lineages, uniparallel organisms, pathogens that cluster together and form in terms of their genome. Then autapomorphic species. The smallest aggregation of sexual populations or asexual lineages diagnosable by a unique combination of character traits. Then biospecies, synonyms, syngen, genetic species, isolation species, inclusive, Mendelian interbreeding, natural population isolated from other such groups. Cladospecies, synonyms, internodal species concept, set of organisms between speciation events or between speciation event and extinction. Then cohesion species, evolutionary lineages bounded by cohesion mechanisms that cause reproductive communities, particularly genetic exchange and ecological interchangeability. Then compleospecies, a species pair where one species plunders the genetic resources of another via introgressive interbreeding. Then composite species, synonyms, phylospecies in part, internodal species in part, cladospecies in part. All organisms belong to an internodon and its descendants. An internodon is defined as a part of organism whose parent-child relations are not split. An ecospecies, synonyms, ecotypes, a lineage of closely related set of lineages which occupy an adaptive zone minimally different from that of any other lineage in its range, which evolves separately from all lineages outside this range. Then evolution of the species, specifications, a lineage, an ancestral cohesion species. Once again, we are going to learn about this agamospecies, then autapomorphic species, biospecies, cladospecies, then cohesion species, compleo species. Once again, agamospecies, autapomorphic species, biospecies, cladospecies, then cohesion species, compilospecies, composite species, ecospecies, ecotypes, a lineage of closely related set of lineages which occupy the adaptive zone, minimally different from that of any other lineage in its range and which evolves separately from all lineages outside its range. Then evolutionary species, specifications, a lineage, an ancestral descendant sequence of populations evolving separately from others and with its own unitary evolutionary role and tendencies. Then evolutionary significant unit, synonyms, biospecies in part and evolutionary species in part. A population or a group of populations that is substantially reproductively isolated from other conspecific population units represents an important component in the evolutionary legacy of the species. Then genealogical concordant species, synonyms, biospecies in part, cladospecies in part, phylogenetics in part. Population subdivisions, concordance identified by multiple independent genetic traits constitute the population units worthy of recognition as phylogenetic taxa. Then genic species, a species formed by the fixation of all isolating genetic traits in the common genome of the entire population. So genetic species, gene genets, groups of organisms that may inherit characters from each other, common gene pool, reproductive common community that forms a genetic unit. Synonyms, polythetic species, clusters of monotypic or polythetic biological entities identified using morphology of genetics, forming groups that have few or no intermediates when in contact. Then Henningian species, synonyms, biospecies in part, cladospecies in part, phylospecies, intermodal species, a tocogenetic community that arise from a stem species is dissolved into two new species and ends when it goes extinct or species. Then internodal species, organisms are conspecific in virtue of their common membership of a part of a genealogical network between two permanently splitting events or splitting event and extinction. Then least inclusive taxonomic unit, evolutionary group in part, phylospecies, a taxonomic group that is diagnosable in terms of its autapomorphs but has no effect, fixed rank or binomial. Then morphospecies, classical species, Linnaean species. Species are the simplest groups that are constantly and persistently distinct and distinguishable by ordinary means. The non-dimensional species delimitation and a non-dimensional stem, a system without the dimensions of space and time. So nothospecies, synonyms hybrid species, reticulate species formed from the hybridization of two distinct parent species, often by polyploidy. Then phylospecies, synonyms autapomorphic phylospecies, monophyletic phylospecies, minimal monophyletic units, monophyletic species and lineages. Smallest unit appropriate for phylogenetic analysis. The smallest biological entities that are diagnosable and monophyletic. Unit product of natural selection and descent. A geographically constrained group with one or more unique apomorphs, autapomorphs. Then phenospecies. Phaena, operational taxonomic unit, a class of organisms that share most of a set of characters. Then recognition species, specific mate recognition system. A species is that most inclusive population of individual biparental organisms which share a common fertilization system. And reproductive competition species, synonyms hypermodern species concept, biospecies, most extensive units in the natural economy, such as the reproductive competition occurs among their parts. Then successional species, arbitrary anagistic stages in morphological forms, mainly in the paleontological record. Then taxonomic species, specimens considered to be members of a kind and on the evidence they are alike as their hereditary relatives. So which are the major types? Agomospecies, autapomorphic species, biospecies, cladospecies, cohesion species, compilospecies, composite species, ecospecies, evolutionary significant unit, genealogical concordance species, genetic species, genotypic cluster, henogen species, internodal species, least inclusive taxonomic unit, then morphospecies, non-dimensional species, nothospecies, phylospecies, phenospecies, recognition species, reproductive competition species, successional species, and taxonomic species. If you need more clarification about this points, just pause the video and read. Thank you.